I felt worthless, like I was something less than human that he could do with as he wished.
You're stripped of everything.
The agency failed me and my fellow inmates. We were knowingly confined in a facility that was unsafe, inhumane, and unsecure.
Every day we see inmates on TV and in movies. A lot of us can only imagine what it's like to be behind bars, and there's no better person to tell a story of cruelty and survival than the victim himself.
Hey, check it out. Check out what the chicks are doing.
Well, in this case, the victim herself. We're about to look into the worst female prisons anywhere on Earth. And if you're a little too sensitive, you may need to brace yourself. The California Institution for Women. With the reports around about this place, the state of this Californian prison is enough to keep anyone away from crime. The California Institution for Women, commonly referred to as CIW, is a state prison for women located in Chino, California. It is filled with thousands of female inmates with particular needs, including those who are pregnant and have HIV, mental health issues, and have been associated with and misuse. Despite its purpose being to lessen the blow on criminals with already existing problems, it has been known for treating those same inmates harshly and making them live in horrific conditions. Sometimes, when it becomes unbearable, inmates take their own lives, unable to keep up with the conditions of the prison life. Between the 1st of January 2013 and July 2016, 6 women tragically committed suicide while incarcerated at the CIW. And after these tragic incidents, there was a noticeable increase in suicide attempts among the prison population. But sadly, the worst had just begun. In 2017, the prison recorded an incident that would forever stain its history. This particular case involved an unnamed inmate who had been admitted to the facility after being assessed and diagnosed as mentally fit. After she was incarcerated, she was prescribed medication, and after taking it consistently for several weeks, she was scheduled for a follow-up evaluation. However, when medical staff re-evaluated her, it became clear that she was still struggling with severe mental health issues, and at the time of this assessment, she was in a highly disturbed, psychotic state, and her behavior was unsettling.
Hey, hold up. Hey,
In fact, she was so distressed that she had been screaming roughly every 15 minutes over a span of 4 hours. And then the worst happened. Before anyone could do anything, the inmate somehow managed to reach up with her left hand and removed her own left eye. The officials were not prompt in their response, and before they could enter and intervene, she did something even more disturbing. In a state of extreme psychosis, she went so far as to eat her own eyeball. This just goes to show how extremely negligent the officials are and how they seem to forget that these inmates are also human and need special care. Despite showing clear signs of psychosis and being visibly unwell, there was no special watch over her. Till today, it remains one of the most horrifying incidents in the prison's history, but this next prison is particularly harsh towards pregnant women. HMP Bronzefield. Her Majesty's Prison Bronzefield is an adult and young offender female prison located on the outskirts of Ashford, a town in Surrey, England. This facility is known for being the largest female prison in all of Europe, housing thousands of incarcerated women, both adults and younger offenders. But unfortunately, the prison has also been the site of multiple disturbing incidents that have been linked to neglect on the part of prison staff and officials. Between 2017 and 2019, at least 4 women gave birth in horrendous and life-threatening conditions. In one shocking case, an 18-year-old mother, Rihanna Cleary, gave birth alone in her cell, which on its own is very concerning considering the potential risks involved in childbirth.
She was an extremely vulnerable young woman. She was only 18 years old. She had a history of trauma.
In another case, a pregnant woman was left in labor throughout the night with no medical support, and she had to cut the umbilical cord with her own teeth. If you think that's bad, you should hear Natasha Chin's story. Natasha Chin was an inmate who tragically died in 2016, just less than 2 days after being admitted to the prison. Before her death, Chin experienced a health episode in which she vomited continuously for 9 hours as a result of an undertreated withdrawal from alcohol. Despite the fact that she was in an alarming state, she was neither given medical attention nor provided with the prescribed medication she needed. For hours, she rang the bell in her cell, desperately calling for help, but the prison staff failed to respond to her calls for assistance because they claimed to be unaware that the cell bells were faulty and not functioning properly. After the worst had happened, a coroner who looked into Chin's death testified that her passing could indeed have been prevented. They explained that if her condition had been closely monitored and properly addressed by the healthcare team, the vomiting would have likely subsided and that she would not have passed away from a minor illness. Her tragic ending was followed by a backlash from the media, but unfortunately, the prison was never sued for contributing to her death. All that followed was an apology, as though it could undo the damage. Neglect and carelessness are one thing, but this next prison should rather be called the Center for Abuse. The Central California Women's Facility. The Central California Women's Facility, commonly referred to as CCWF, is located in Chowchilla, right in the heart of California's Central Valley. This huge facility is the second largest women's prison in the entire United States, and it houses thousands of female inmates. Over the years, the prison has been the subject of dozens of lawsuits alleging and misconduct by members of the prison staff. The living conditions are alarming, and some have even concluded that seeing animals live in such conditions would be appalling. The women are being abused and mistreated by those entrusted with their care and custody. One such woman, Latasha Brown, has recently chosen to come forward and publicly share her experiences for the very first time. After enduring 21 long and gruesome years within California's prison system, Brown bravely spoke out about the abuse she has suffered from correctional officers during her time in custody. And it wasn't just once, or twice, or even 10 times. Latasha was living a nightmare in the daytime. There was a particular officer who often watched her as she showered, and it went on for days. But of course, there was nothing she could do about it. Then there was another official who took advantage of her helplessness and demanded favors in exchange for legal help. She also spoke of other officers who forced themselves on her and followed up their assaults with small gifts, as though those gestures could somehow lessen the gravity of what they had done. Sometimes last year, one of those officers, former correctional officer Gregory Rodriguez, eventually faced some serious charges. Rodriguez was charged with nearly 100 counts of violence against female inmates, including harassment of at least 22 women between 2014 and 2022. Although he's currently in jail and awaiting trial, for many of the women still incarcerated there today, this abuse has become so widespread that it now feels almost inescapable, and even normal even. Sad as it is, these women have nowhere to run, and neither do the women in Lowell Correctional Institution. Lowell Correctional Institution. The Lowell Correctional Institution, located in an unincorporated part of Marion County, Florida, just north of Ocala in the Lowell area, is a large women's prison managed by the Florida Department of Corrections. As of 2015, there were approximately 2,696 women held in the main prison alone, making it the largest women's prison in the United States. At that time, Lowell's prison population even surpassed that of the Central California Women's Facility, logically, which had previously held the record for the largest population of incarcerated women in the country. There have been frequent reports of inmate mistreatment, including physical and inhumane living conditions and a general lack of oversight over the years. One particularly tragic case occurred in August 2019, when 52-year-old inmate Cheryl Weimar was brutally assaulted by correctional officers. She was assigned to clean toilets. Meanwhile, she had a hip condition, so it affected her ability to clean the toilets that day, and when she complained and asked to be assigned to a different task, she saw hell. This attack left her quadriplegic, as the injuries she sustained were so severe that she lost the ability to move from the neck down.
I hate every minute of it. It's like a slap in my face.
It was one of the most heartbreaking incidents in the history of the prison, and Cheryl was eventually granted compassionate release. In 2020, when the world was shaken by COVID-19, it was 10 times the horror for the inmates in this prison. And by the time it was September 2011, nearly half of the inmates had tested positive for COVID-19, and over 100 of them had passed away. In this next prison, however, inmates preferred to take their own lives than cope with the inhumane conditions. His Majesty's Prison Style. His Majesty's Prison Style is a facility located in Cheshire, England, and operated by His Majesty's Prison Service. But believe me, there is nothing majestic about this place. In 2003, Style Prison was called out for its concerning record of inmate suicides, which ranked among the highest in England and Wales at the time. And the cause? There was a troubling rate of bullying among inmates, drug use within the facility, and severe overcrowding. The environment was hostile, and at some point the mental health of the inmates began to deteriorate. For years and years, no one paid mind to the horrendous things that these women were made to go through. Then this happened. In 2020, Style was once again in the spotlight for a tragic incident that involved a pregnant inmate. The woman, who was serving just an 8-month sentence, unexpectedly went into labor and gave birth to a stillborn baby in one of the prison toilets. She was in a lot of pain and cried repeatedly for help, but it took hours before she received any kind of medical attention. She eventually survived the incident, but when investigations were made, it revealed that the prison's radio communication system was faulty, so it was almost impossible to get through to emergency services. As if that wasn't enough, the officials never made an attempt to administer CPR to the baby after delivery. Till today, the medical experts who examined the mother have concluded that had she received prompt and proper medical attention, there was a possibility that the baby's life could have been saved. But how about this prison in Uzbekistan, where inmates are punished in place of their relatives? Tashkent Women's Prison. In 2023, Human Rights Watch released a report that showed an obvious decline in Uzbekistan's human rights record as a nation. There were incidents of unlawful killings carried out by authorities, accounts of torture, as well as other forms of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment by the government. For those imprisoned, the conditions are even worse. The halls are cramped and unhygienic because there is constantly dirty water covering the floor. Sometimes, water from the sewage system overflows into the cell, making conditions even more unsanitary and unbearable. The food provided is enough to make anyone ill, but they put up with it just for survival. In fact, the women are treated poorly and tortured for complaining about being treated poorly. Once, some women were punished simply for advocating that a fellow prisoner, a woman with a severe heart condition, receive urgent medical treatment. The woman in urgent need of medical care, Ms. Rakima Akhmadalieva, never received any medical assistance while detained in the prison. As a matter of fact, she wasn't even arrested for her own crime. The government was in search of her husband, but took her instead as a way of punishing her partner. Now let's look at this in contrast to the special treatment given to Gulnara Karimova, the 52-year-old daughter of former authoritarian Uzbek President Islam Karimov. According to claims from a former inmate who also served time in this facility, Karimova enjoys privileges that are not available to other inmates. She does not eat in the prison canteen like the rest of the inmates. Instead, her meals are brought in from outside the prison, meaning she gets to eat anything she wants. While about 6 inmates share a cell, she has 4 beds, and even her prison uniform is quite comfortable compared to her inmates. She's also allowed to wear shoes with laces, even though shoelaces are generally banned in prisons for safety reasons. But in this next prison, power may not even be an advantage. Karchak Prison. Karchak Prison, a facility for women, is located in Tehran Province, Iran, and it is known for its extremely poor health conditions. One would think these inmates are in a pig's pen. And no, there aren't individual rooms for prisoners. Instead, there is just one massive hall with around 600 beds. This means about 800 inmates, including some children, are forced to sleep on the floor. There is no basic sanitation, there is no proper sewage system or hygiene standards, and the prison infirmary is unable to handle any kind of serious health outbreak. During the coronavirus pandemic, for example, the infirmary didn't have basic supplies like masks or sanitizers for inmates, and it was almost impossible to control the spread of the virus within the overcrowded facility. Before authorities could do much, dozens of inmates had contracted the virus and fallen severely ill. When it comes to fights, it's just best to avoid the heat zone because the prison staff does little to maintain order among inmates. As brutal as they are, when fights break out, the guards do not intervene. they simply allow the situation to escalate dangerously. In fact, there have been instances where such fights led to the death of one or more inmates due to the lack of timely intervention from prison staff. Now let's look at this prison in Cambodia, where it got so bad that the United Nations had to step in. Phnom Penh Women's Prison. Phnom Penh Women's Prison is a facility in Cambodia that has reached nearly 400% of its intended capacity. As the years go by, it only gets worse, majorly because of the government's drug crackdown, which has led to a rapid increase in the prison population. Here, life is extremely difficult, and women face challenges every single day just to meet basic needs. Almost everything comes at a price for food, clean water, adequate healthcare, and even electricity. If inmates want to receive family visits, spend time outside their cells, or even secure a small space to sleep on the cell floor, they are often required to pay for these privileges, which are actually rights with what little money they have. Clean water and basic hygiene items like soap are also quite hard to find, and this does not in any way help women who are pregnant, breastfeeding, or menstruating. These circumstances are actually far below the standards set by the United Nations for the treatment of prisoners, nor do they follow the guidelines for the treatment of women prisoners, known as the Bangkok Rules. Well, this next prison is often described with just one word: gangs. Pollsmoor Prison. If you thought gangs were a male thing, then you should probably think again. In this South African women's prison, gang activity is a powerful and almost unstoppable force. The prison houses members of various notorious gangs, and in an attempt to reduce their influence, the administration has had to separate the prisoners into 3 distinct sections on a single floor. Each section accommodates about 500 to 750 inmates, and the authorities thought it wise to make these drastic changes because new arrivals are often targeted and pressured to join. However, because prison wardens are only present in these sections for less than 2/3 of each day, the gangs are still as powerful. In fact, the inmates basically adjusted to the prison's new systems and continued to rule using violence and honestly, the structure is pretty tight. The prison's gangs, commonly known as the Numbers, consist of 3 main groups: the 26s, the 27s, and the 28s. The 26s handle only financial activities. They secure money for the gang through gambling, smuggling, and other means. The 27s enforce gang rules, which often include carrying out violent punishment on behalf of the gang. Meanwhile, the 28s, known as the Soldiers, maintained strict control over relationships among the women. They are responsible for procuring and keeping partners, referred to as wifeys. You'd think that these gangs are at war with each other, but surprisingly, they keep the order and maintain the hierarchy amongst the prisoners. They're almost as organized as the prison management can be, as long as you don't rebel against them. Even though it's a women's prison, it could still pass as the most dangerous prison in South Africa. But let's see if it's a match for this horrible prison in Congo. Makala Women's Prison. The Makala Women's Prison in the Congo is known majorly for overcrowding and inhumane conditions. The prison, located in Kinshasa, was designed to hold about 1,500 people at most, yet is home to over 15,000 prisoners. Swing, which is 10 times its intended capacity. Yet one singular event changed everything. In September 2024, more than 260 female inmates experienced horrific during an attempted mass escape. The only words to describe it are chaotic, violent, and traumatic for the inmates who were already living in harsh conditions. By the time all the chaos was over, about 129 inmates lost their lives as prison guards resorted to using live ammunition against inmates who were trying to break free from the facility. Worse, a United Nations report later revealed that 268 out of the 348 women held at Makala had also suffered violence, including during the attempted mass escape. Even more disturbing is the fact that of these victims, 17 of them were under the age of 19. And so, whether or not they make it out of prison, they are forever prisoners of someone else's cruelty and negligence. This leads us to the next prison, where pregnant women are made to eat rotten food. El Buen Women's Prison. El Buen Women's Prison, located in Bogotá, Colombia, is one of the country's largest facilities and is currently housing around 1,859 women. Despite this large population of inmates, there is only one doctor on duty during the day and another at night. This limited medical coverage makes it nearly impossible for women to secure appointments, even when they're suffering from serious health conditions. It's even worse for pregnant women. There is no dedicated staff to address gynecological issues, and there's no one qualified medic to screen for cancer or perform crucial procedures like breast exams. When inmates suffer from intense cramps and heavy bleeding caused by infections, all they are given to cope with the pain is a dose of ibuprofen, which barely does the job. The food situation is just as terrible, and the meals served aren't even fit for animals to eat. For example, the meat given usually appears as if it were decomposing. Even the juices smell spoiled. Soups are basically just colored water with barely any nutrients to sustain the body. Inmates really have no choice but to consume whatever is placed in front of them, as it is either that or go hungry. There's an old saying among women incarcerated in Russia that goes, "If you haven't done time in Mordovia, you haven't done time at all." This Russian prison for women explains it all. IK2 Yavas, the corrective colony of the Federal Service of Execution of Sentences of Russia for the Republic of Mordovia, or IK2 Yavas, is a women's corrective colony in Russia, and according to investigators, the prison feels as though it has been stuck in time for 50 years. This is because its infrastructure and operations are outdated, and life for inmates only gets harder and harder. Inmates are housed dormitory-style, sleeping side by side on rows of 100 bunk beds within a large shared room. And here, there's no such thing as privacy or personal space, and personal items aren't even allowed. Even at night, there is little to no supervision, and inmates constantly have to watch their backs for prison bullies. Let's just say the women inmates are familiar with the constant threat of physical and emotional abuse, both from fellow inmates and sometimes even from the prison guards meant to maintain order. On a typical day that begins early, prisoners have to wake up at 6 a.m. sharp, and their morning routine includes group exercises. After that, they are required to work at sewing machines, where inmates toil for 10 to 12 hours each day, producing uniforms for military personnel and prison staff. One former inmate, Olga Shilayeva, who was released in 2017, spoke out about the brutal treatment she endured while she was incarcerated. She recounted frequent beatings by Vyacheslav Kimyaev, a senior official who was known for his tactics. Despite the allegations, not only was Kimyaev spared, he was later promoted to oversee the entire prison. At this point, is it okay to say the prison system was designed to work against women? Maybe this next prison will leave us with some answers. Sednaya Women's Prison. Sednaya Prison, located near Damascus, Syria, is often referred to by the grim nickname, the Human Slaughterhouse. Although it is fully operated by the Syrian government, it functions as a military prison, and one can only wonder why thousands of detainees are held there under unimaginable conditions. By 2021, an estimated number of 30,000 inmates has died from either torture, mistreatment, or the appalling living conditions. You can't even begin to imagine the horrors of this place, but this former inmate has all the haunting details. This woman, who was detained simply for participating in a peaceful protest, shared the terrible choices that detainees were often forced to make. In some cases, prisoners were given the choice of either facing death themselves or killing one of their own family members or friends. When it comes to punishments, the prison guards can get really creative. They go from perpetual beatings and assault to decapitations and brutal burnings. In fact, a particular torture method used for detainees, called the flying carpet, just takes the cake. This method involves prisoners being tied to a foldable board that can bend in the middle, and they're bent alongside the board.
During every or almost every interrogation, detainees faced this catalogue of horrific ill treatment.
As of 2017, the US government had to step in, and they alleged that a crematorium had been built at Sednaya, allegedly for the purpose of unduly disposing of the bodies of murdered prisoners. Well, at least now you know that whatever you do, never get into trouble in Syria. You might also not want to get into trouble in Sri Lanka either. The Welikada prison is no fun. The Welikada Women's Prison. The Welikada prison, also known as the Magazine Prison, is one of Sri Lanka's largest maximum security prisons and serves as the main detention center for women in the country. Like many prisons around the world, overcrowding is one of the major problems of the Wellicada prison, and there are about 1,700 detainees currently housed there, which is far beyond the facility's intended capacity. This overcrowding eventually leads to cramped conditions that are not only uncomfortable, but also pose serious health and safety risks for the women who are detained there. There are about 150 people who sleep in a cell that was originally designed to hold around 70 people, and the hall is so crammed that many inmates end up sleeping on top of each other or in positions that are far from restful. Let's not forget that some of these women are pregnant women and others are nursing mothers. Also, the cell has an open drain that attracts all kinds of pests, particularly rats. According to reports, one inmate was once bitten by a rat, and she had to be taken to the hospital to receive an anti-rabies shot. In Australia, it's even more horrendous. Bandiup Women's Prison. Bandiup Women's Prison, situated in Western Australia, is the primary facility for incarcerated women in that region. And so because of this, there are serious overcrowding and resource issues that have seriously affected the women there. As recently as 2019, it was reported that women were still sleeping on mattresses on the floor due to a lack of available beds. Some of them couldn't even get mattresses. They just lay on the bare floor. Meals have been described as insufficient, bland, or unappetizing, leading to malnutrition or vitamin deficiencies. In some cases, inmates are even made to eat food that appeared spoiled or unfit to eat, yet they had little choice, as hunger and limited access to additional food options left them with few alternatives. And despite various refurbishments and upgrades, no accommodations have been made to specifically support mothers and their babies. Experts have now intervened to say that imprisonment in Western Australia is still heavily based on standards and practices designed with men in mind. In fact, staffing at the prison remains predominantly male, which is not exactly ideal in a women's correctional facility. The prison has also faced allegations of abuse and misconduct, both from other inmates and allegedly from certain staff members. Safe to say that in Bandiup, there's no such thing as human rights, and of all the horrifying cases, this one has to be the most sickening. In the Bandiup prison, a woman was once found to be shackled to her bed while giving birth in the prison hospital. And it didn't end there. Till today, pregnant women would rather terminate their own pregnancies than go to prison with the fear of being mistreated with a baby in their stomachs. If you think that's bad, wait till you hear how women in the next prison are incited towards harming fellow inmates. Indiana Women's Prison. The Indiana Women's Prison was established way back in 1873, making it the first correctional facility in the United States specifically designed for adult female inmates. By 2003, the prison had grown, with an average daily population of about 420 inmates. Many of these women fall into special needs categories, meaning they have requirements that the prison must accommodate. For instance, a large number of these inmates are elderly. Some have mental illnesses, others are pregnant, and there are even juveniles who, despite their age, have been sentenced. However, it's almost as though nothing has ever changed in here since 1873. The staff care so very little for the inmates, and the prison resources are barely enough to go round. If anything, the situation keeps going from bad to worse. In 2022, 28 women incarcerated in the Indiana Women's Prison came forward and filed 2 separate federal lawsuits that allege they were either threatened, sexually assaulted, or, in the case of 2 women, even raped. They weren't just assaulted by prison staff, they were assaulted by men who were also incarcerated at the same facility, and they claimed that these men were able to gain access to the women's cells by bribing a corrections officer with $1,000 to get the access keys. If this isn't cruelty, then what is? Ask these women in China. Heilongjiang Women's Prison, China. The Heilongjiang prison for women in China is nothing short of hell on earth. Not only are the prison staff cruel and negligent, they also incite violence between the inmates. For Yongxia, it cost her life. Ms. Mu Yongxia was a 75-year-old woman who tragically lost her life on the 13th of July, 2023. Her death was a result of abuse inflicted by both prison guards and inmates at the Heilongjiang Women's Prison. You must be thinking, why would anyone want to harm an old lady? She was targeted because she refused to renounce her faith in Falun Gong, a spiritual practice that has long faced persecution in China. For over 20 years now, Falun Gong practitioners have endured unjust arrest and severe abuse while in custody. In Mu's case, the inmates detained alongside her recounted how she was tortured and beaten every day. The prison guards would order other inmates to scratch her and pull at her hair. And in the final months of her life, she would always appear disoriented and obviously worn down by the continuous harassment. But that was just Mo's tragic ending, but how many more women have been killed by this cruelty? Thanks for watching. If you found this informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let us know in the comments which prison shocked you the most. Stay tuned for more stories that reveal hidden truths from around the world.